Every year they come from all over Vermont, from the smaller towns and the larger cities. Some of them farmers, some of them lawyers, doctors, store clerks, but all of them elected representatives of their local communities. And they meet in Montpelier to govern. Join me now as Adelphia Cable Communications takes us inside the State House. Hello and welcome once again to Montpelier, the seat of state government. We'll be talking with several senators this week as push has come to shove regarding taxes and cuts. We'll be looking in on Senate action on a proposal to raise the state income tax. We're talking with Senator Doyle and others. Go with me now inside the State House.
Shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Appropriations in the 14th instance? Are you ready for the question? If so...
Could I request that you explain what the vote means?
I will.
And then we do it by roll.
And a roll call is also requested. A yes vote supports the committee position. Are you ready for the question? If so, Secretary shall call the roll. Rebecca?
Yes.
Mr. Baker? Yes. Mr. Rogers? No. Mr. Bloomer? No. Mr. Carlson?
Yes.
Please listen to the results of your vote. Those in favor of the amendment, 18. Those opposed, 11, and the amendment passes. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Appropriations?
The lunch break before we get into other amendments. There's one on the calendar and there may be others. So I move the Senate stand and adjourn until 1:30.
Are there any announcements? The Senator from Chipman. Are there any announcements? If not, the Senator from Chipman has moved the Senate stand and adjourn until 1:30. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye by saying no. The ayes have it. The Senate stands in adjournment until 1:30 this afternoon.
We're just outside the Senate chamber here talking with Senator Crowley from Chittenden County. Senator, there was just a vote on the Senate floor. Can you explain that to us?
Well, the vote on the Senate floor was in the form of a motion by Senator Reedy from Madison County, was to not delete $200,000 in mental health funds for community service agencies. I happen to agree with the senator from Madison and voted to reinstate the money back to the original intent of the budget. Unfortunately, we didn't have the horses, so to speak, to get that reinstated. So
that money is in effect deleted at this point?
That's right. Some $200,000 has been struck from their budget. Yes.
Talking now with Senator Edgar May. Senator, I understand you're the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. You have got your hands full, don't you?
It's an interesting time. There's an old Chinese curse that says, may you live in interesting times. We're fulfilling it this year in the Senate Appropriations Committee.
I read recently where you've come up with $15 million in potential cuts if you can get 16 other senators to go along with you.
Well, we managed to do that at least today. We're on our way towards doing that. We have a balanced budget in our view. We did have a vote this morning that indicates that the general outline of the reductions that we're proposing are acceptable to our colleagues, or at least a majority of them.
And now we're looking at some potential amendments to those?
What is the plan?
I would not exclude the possibility of other amendments tomorrow before the bill is finally passed. There'll be a major amendment this afternoon that would raise some additional revenues and allow some early withholding under the assumption that we are in fact going to increase the income tax in this legislative session. How that will come out, I don't want to speculate, but what we have now is we have a budget that is in balance even after these major reductions of revenues. As you know, this has been a changing situation from week to week, and unfortunately the change has always been downward. At this point, as we brought this budget bill to the floor of the Senate, we have a balanced budget. The committee and I do not believe in deficit spending. We do not believe in a planned deficit. We don't believe that we ought to have credit card government where we buy now and our grandchildren pay later. And therefore, it is a struggle to get a balanced budget when you only have 4 months left in this fiscal year. And the problem is going to be exacerbated when we get into working on the 1991 budget.
I know that there have been attempts to hold harmless 3 different areas: the human services, the environmental, and the educational. Is it going to be possible, in your view, to hold all 3 of these harmless in these tight economic times?
I think those areas are going to receive some preferential treatment in terms of the amount of lesser effort that we in fact are making. Are they going to be held totally immune from some budget adjustments? The answer is probably not, because the 1991 issue is of such severity at this point that we either need significant tax revenues above and beyond the ones that are being discussed now, or we need to make a kind of massive budget reduction that, frankly, in some areas I'm simply not prepared to do. I'm not prepared to lose our national ranking and the kind of feeling that Vermonters have and pride about the effort they've made on behalf of children. I'm unwilling to dismantle what is the best student scholarship program in this country. No Vermonter is denied a higher education after high school for lack of funds, and I'm simply not willing to take that apart. So what we're going to have is a lot of jawboning, some very difficult decisions to make on what our priorities are as we work through the dilemma of 1991 without anywhere near the kind of revenues that we had anticipated.
We've heard this from the beginning, even before the session opened, but certainly from the beginning with the governor's State of the State address, that it was going to be a difficult session. There's going to be some tough decisions to be made. But it's been a lot of talk, really, up until this week. Now that push has come to shove. What about this proposal from the Senate Finance for increasing the income tax? Do you think that'll meet favorably in the Senate?
I would hope so, because frankly our budget is dependent on 2 essential elements. One thing is significant reductions, but the other thing is significant new revenues. And if we miss one or the other and don't marry these 2 efforts, we will have a whopping deficit at the end of 1991. And it is the resolve and commitment of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and I'm sure a majority of us here, not to see that kind of unfortunate scenario play out.
We've talked about other taxes, splinter taxes, sin taxes, and so forth. The one that seems to keep coming up and the one that seems to be meeting with the most acceptance is an increase in the income tax. Is there a reason for that?
Well, I think the income tax has always been the fairest tax. I've been here over a 16-year period. I've voted to raise and lower the income tax 10 different times. I think that's a tax that is the fairest. I personally favor an increase in the rooms and meals tax because Vermont now has a lower rooms and meals tax than virtually all of the surrounding states, and it's time that we collect our fair share from our visitors. And as far as Vermonters are concerned, another 10 cents if we go out to supper is an optional decision. You know, we don't have to go out to supper. But I would oppose some other taxes, but I would support an increase in the rooms and meals tax, certainly an increase in the income tax, because those are fair taxes to adjust.
Thank you, Senator Edgar May. Talking now with Senator Vince Illuzzi. Vince, you're on the Senate Finance Committee, the committee that voted out the recommendation to move Vermont's income tax from 25 to 28%. Maybe give us the basis of that recommendation.
Well, I voted against the recommendation. The committee is made up of 7 members, 4 Democrats and 3 Republicans, and the 3 Republicans voted against this approach to essentially raising a tax when we don't even have a tax bill to do it with or to know what the spending is going to be next year. It's unprecedented.
I was unclear on that. I didn't realize that it did not come out with a unanimous vote and voted, as you've indicated, directly along party lines. Putting the onus back on the Republicans, where would you see the funding coming from, if not from the income tax?
Well, usually what you do is you pass a bill for spending for the next fiscal year, and then you decide how much tax revenue you need to fulfill to generate revenues to fill those expenditures. And this is the first year that I've ever seen us deciding, as with the cart before the horse, that we're going to raise the income tax rate to 27 or 28%, and we still don't even know what our spending is going to be next year.
So it's not a question necessarily being opposed to increasing the income tax as much as it is the process that's being followed to do it?
That's right, because what we're doing is we're going to be generating a sufficient sum of money now to generate X amount of millions of dollars, and maybe we won't need that much. And I don't think we should be blindly raising a tax effectively through this mechanism before we know what the expenditures are going to be.
Let me ask you a general question on income tax as opposed to some other taxes. What is your feeling about it as an appropriateness?
Well, it's the most progressive way to do it. You tax people who supposedly can better afford to pay it. The concern I have is that there is an attempt by some members of our committee to make the Vermont tax more progressive than it already is. And since we're based on the federal tax, which is progressive, I think it would unfairly tax some of the higher income Vermonters. No one feels any sympathy for those folks, but it's a question of fairness.
We'll find out shortly, won't we, on the Senate floor?
In just about 2 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Illuzzi.
Pay money when they file their income tax form next spring. What would the bill do and how would it work? As I indicated to you earlier, if it's passed by the March 15th, it will generate $2,080,000. Just as background, 80% of the income tax collected in the state of Vermont is collected by withholding. Obviously, the other 20% is collected by those who pay estimated taxes. The Commissioner has indicated that as soon as the bill became law, the tax department would, through various means of publicity, immediately notify all employers that they should immediately change the withholding rate as of their next payroll. A separate statutory tax, which is the withholding tax, which stands by itself separate from the income tax.
Talking now with Senator John Bloomer. Senator, we've just come from the Senate chamber where we've seen a very close 15-14 vote on a tax issue. Do you want to explain that to the viewers for us?
Yeah, I'll give it an attempt. This afternoon, the Senate considered the Budget Adjustment Act for 1990, at which time the Senate Appropriations Committee made various deductions and adjustments to the budget that we're now operating under. And that was approved by the Senate without a great deal of discussion. Subsequent to that, the Finance Committee, through its chairman, Senator Skinner, proposed an amendment to that proposal, which in effect indicated that the employers of the state must withhold from their employees 27% of their taxpayers' liability, the federal tax liability. And fortunately for the people of the state, the vast majority of the Republicans in the Senate opposed this effort and were joined by enough Democrats to defeat the proposal 15-14. What the proposal meant in effect was that although a taxpayer's obligation to the state of Vermont is only 25% of a person's federal tax obligation, the state wanted to start withholding at the rate of 27%, even though we haven't raised taxes, we haven't considered the tax issue or anything else. And so I spoke against it, and other Republican members spoke against it, and fortunately, I think for the people of the state, it was defeated.
What we're looking at is a proposal that flies in the face of the general rule that the House institutes taxes and the Senate acts on them. Is the opposition to it based on this tradition, or is it based on the fact that we don't want to see increases in the income tax?
No, the basis of the defeat today, in my opinion, I raised two issues on the floor, one of which was the constitutional issue, which it's my opinion that any revenue enhancement proposals must originate in the House of Representatives. For some reason, Senate Finance wanted to do it, and I didn't think that was proper, and so stated. Secondly, the matter of raising taxes was not the issue today. And that shouldn't be considered, and I don't think was considered. The issue today was whether you can withhold somebody's money from their wages, withholding wages, in excess of the amount needed to pay their state tax. And that's what was being proposed, and I think it's just entirely improper for somebody to propose that. And I indicated on the floor that I didn't want to go to town meeting day this coming Tuesday, look people in the eye and tell them that we all recognize that all you have to pay to the state of Vermont is 25% of what you pay to Uncle Sam. But for reasons best known to us, we're going to start taking 27% of that money from you. And we were, in effect, doing you a favor. I couldn't buy that argument, and neither did the Senate. And I was very pleased that it was defeated.
Thank you, Senator Bloomer. Talking now with Senator Doyle, the author of the annual Doyle poll that circulated at town meeting. Senator Doyle, how long have you been circulating the Doyle poll?
21 years, Bruce.
You've, over the years, seen some important issues come and go?
Yes, in the early 70s we saw a lot of interest in the environmental issues, and then in the early 80s they were more monetary, and now they're back to environmental and monetary.
Looking over the list of them this year's poll, there's some that have been highlighted in the media. Is there some that you're particularly anxious to get some results on?
Well, we're interested, of course, in the banning of disposable diapers is an issue, and cigarette vending machines, banning styrofoam coffee cups. But then there's one on Act 200. Should regional planning commissions have the power to veto the plans of towns and cities? And there's a question on increased money for education, increased tax dollars for transportation. All the key issues before the legislature, Bruce, are on this survey.
Where do you get the questions from? Are they? Do you have a committee or someone that helps you?
Well, first of all, important issues pending before the General Assembly are very important, but citizens and individual legislators contact me, and then usually on a bipartisan basis I consult with other legislators to make sure that they're fair questions and so to make sure it's a fair mix.
What is the purpose of the poll? What will you do with the information?
Well, I think the 70 legislators who will be taking them home on town meeting day will want to know how Vermonters feel in their district about these particular issues, and I think they're one factor that people consider when they vote on particular issues, know how their district feels.
So it's a chance to give the local voters some input, direct input on a variety of issues to their own legislators.
That's right, and for the local legislators to know what some of the key issues are pending before our legislature. That's another reason.
Have you seen in the past where votes or information gathered during your poll has had an influence, a key influence on some major votes?
Yeah, I've seen legislators who have made up their mind on the basis of how their district feels about a particular issue relating to the survey.
I'm not aware of any other effort like this on an annual, widespread basis to gather public opinion, is there?
No, not in the state of Vermont. I'm sure that it's done in other states, but I felt it was so important to find out how people back home feel about the issues, and many people tell me they're more concerned about the issues than they are concerned about the individual candidates that run.
Thank you, Senator Doyle.
Thank you, Bruce.
Talking now with Senator John McClaughry. Senator McClaughry, you have kind of led the charge against Act 200. It's coming up in at least 75 towns at town meeting. Can you tell us what inspires your opposition?
Well, Bruce, my opposition really reflects that of thousands upon thousands of people around this state who are upset about this act that was passed 2 years ago from two major grounds. The first ground is that leaders of town government are upset because it sets some superior body in charge of their planning process and requires that it be carried out in accordance with 32 very sweeping state goals, which may or may not be the goals of the people in a given town. So from the town government standpoint, there's a feeling that the independence of the towns and the ability to manage their own affairs is severely compromised by being forced into a process where they can be sent back to do it over again or else. The second source of opposition is from individual landowners. It's what I call the human rights issue. You know, the Constitution of Vermont and of the United States protects the right to private property ownership. It's a human right, much as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of worship, freedom of assembly. The people who supported Act 200 quite clearly have in mind creating a great process whereby every little town will be planned and controlled in such a way as these sweeping goals are effectuated. Those goals are very sweeping. Scenic vistas, scenic corridors, special areas, areas of unique educational, cultural, psychological, social, historical interest. In fact, they could give a planning commission an excuse to do anything to anybody. Now, there's really 2 or 3 ways a town can carry out a plan. It can organize its public investments in streets and schools and so on to conform to its plan, which is a necessary and important thing for governments to do. Secondly, it can go out and buy land. If it wants a park, it buys a park. It pays the owner. However, that takes money, and taxpayers do not usually like to raise the property tax to pay for the acquisition of land by their governments, although Stowe has, to name one exception. The third thing is to regulate. And the opponents of Act 200 are quite convinced that if a town is seriously to achieve all those sweeping goals, it will have to fall back on severe regulation. And how severe depends on how severe the Regional Planning Commission is that will pass on the adequacy of the town's plan. Now, the Regional Planning Commissions, of which there are 12, are not elected bodies. They're appointed by selectmen. They cover huge territories in many cases. In the Northeast Kingdom, where I come from, we have 49 towns plus 3 or 4 uninhabited gores that range from the Canadian border all the way down to Wells River. An enormous territory where theoretically as many as 120 people could be voting on my town's plan. And of those 120, I can guarantee you 110 don't really give a hoot about my town's plan, and their votes are for sale, you might say. So there's 2 major objections here, and I'm quite convinced that the sentiment in this state has run very strongly against Act 200, and I'm sure the governor's well aware of that. She's tied her prestige to it, and I think town meeting day will see a considerable blow to that prestige as town after town in the state joins the 19 towns that have already at special meetings voted to not participate in Act 200.
19 towns have voted not to participate. Has there been other votes where towns have said, yes, we want to participate?
No, there have not been votes, but bear in mind that the act is passed and towns would normally expect to participate if they have a planning process, so you don't need to make a decision. In towns where the voters have demanded to make a decision, in every instance, in 19 cases in a row, the town has voted to stay out of Act 200.
The governor and other supporters of Act 200 have consistently called these votes based on ignorance or based on misinformation. How do you see that?
Well, it's true that a lot of people have a difficult time understanding the 70 or 80 pages contained in Act 200, which is not easy for an experienced legislator to understand. Nonetheless, the governor's insulting of the intelligence of the people of this state is, I think, seriously misplaced. What she doesn't understand is that an awful lot of Vermonters have had it with the state muscling in on their local government and their local school district taking care of local affairs, and an awful lot of people in this state cherish the constitutionally protected right of private property ownership and recognize that the destruction of that right means the destruction of the ideals of this little republic. And she is missing the boat badly if she doesn't understand that sentiment. It is broad and it is deep and is quite likely to sweep her out of office in November if she's on the ballot.
If she's on the ballot. Well, Senator Racine has offered some amendments. They're in your committee, I suppose, in the Senate?
Yes. Well, Senator Racine, who was the chairman of the committee at the time the bill was passed, a Democrat from Richmond, has been, at least for a while, willing to listen to different ways to deal with what problems did lead to Act 200's enactment, the genuine problems as opposed to the imaginary problems or simply the power grab, which characterizes most of Act 200 in my mind. He and I have tried to have had some frank discussions about how to deal with some real problems. For example, the town that makes a great investment of its own capital to encourage a major shopping center or industrial park that throws enormous burdens on the adjacent town, that the adjacent town has no tax base to deal with and is left holding the bag. We can all think of towns around ski areas that are facing enormous burdens because of the traffic and the employee housing from the ski area, which can't afford to live in the ski town because the prices are so high. So there are some problems of regional impact for which there needs to be some kind of mechanism to share the burden or share the wealth. You may know that I have a Recreating Democracy on a Human Scale, which spends a lot of time addressing just this question. It's probably not the place to get into that, but suffice it to say, if you had 40 little mini governments around the state, you would have reduced this particular problem at least by a factor of about 5.
You're talking about your Shire Town proposal.
Yes. 40 shires has 1/5 the problems, 1/4 the problems of 250 towns, 246 towns. I should say my arithmetic's bad, 1/6 the problems. But that's not on the table for debate at the moment. The fact that we have many small geographic bodies with growth impacts that expand over their boundaries into 4 or 5 other towns does cause a problem. We have no governmental body that corresponds to the physical problem. Our counties are archaic remnants that don't have any governmental functions except the courts. The regional planning commissions are not governmental bodies in the sense they're not elected, they don't levy taxes, they don't issue regulations. They're a coordinating body. So what we have here really is a governance gap. Act 200 is the wrong way to fill it. There are better ways to fill it. I'm hoping that Act 200 will be bashed so badly after town meeting day that the opportunity will come up to make some important changes in the way we do deal with these kind of problems.
Thank you, Senator McClaughry.
Thank you, Bruce.
Talking now with Linda Miller, and her tag says Linda Miller RN. You're obviously not a legislator. Linda, why are you here in the State House?
We're here today to draw blood. We came American Red Cross blood drawing in the community at the State House, and it's been a very successful day.
I understand you're working with the Legislative Auxiliary.
Well, they volunteer their time as canteen workers and food providers for the donors.
You say you've had a successful day. How many pints?
50 pints on the nose, which is our goal, so we're quite pleased with that.
Wonderful. Did some of the legislators actually give?
Yes, they sure did. They really supported the effort, and we appreciate that a lot.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know it's largely a volunteer effort, and appreciate you coming to the State House.
It was a pleasure to be here, and we'll look forward to our next time here.
Well, that's it for this week's program. We invite you to tune in again next week at the same time when once again we'll take you inside the State House.